Have you ever wondered how close you've come to danger without even realizing it? At Shivering Vault, we take you there, one story at a time. But before you drift off, consider liking this video and commenting where you're watching from. Now, let's dive into these chilling stories. Our family's winter getaway to Tahoe was supposed to be the perfect break. We rented a cozy cabin near Donner Lake, tucked into the snowy woods just outside Truckee, California. My parents and younger sister were thrilled about the idea of lazy mornings, warm fireplaces, and family game nights. But I'm not the type to sit around for too long. I've always been an early riser, and with the snowy trails right at our doorstep, I couldn't resist the idea of an early morning jog. That morning, I woke up before the sun had fully risen. The cabin was quiet except for the soft hum of the heater. I pulled on my running shoes, layered up against the cold, and stepped outside. The air was biting, my breath clouding in front of me, but the peaceful silence of the snow-covered forest made it worth it. I decided to take the same trail I'd spotted the day before, a winding path that looped through the woods and offered a view of the lake halfway through. The snow was fresh, untouched except for a few scattered animal tracks. The crunch of my shoes against the snow was the only sound, and for a while, it felt like I had the whole world to myself. About 10 minutes in, I noticed footprints on the trail ahead. They weren't mine. They were too far in front of me. They looked like sneaker prints, maybe from someone who'd gone jogging earlier that morning. I didn't think much of it at first. Tahoe's a popular spot, and it wasn't unusual for other people to be out enjoying the trails. But as I kept running, I started to notice something strange about the prints. They didn't follow a steady pattern, like someone jogging or walking at a regular pace. Instead, they were spaced out irregularly, as if the person had been running in bursts or staggering. I slowed down, glancing at the woods around me. The trees stood silent, their bare branches weighed down with snow. Everything seemed still, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I told myself I was being paranoid. The trail took a sharp curve, and that's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Another set of footprints, larger and heavier, had joined the first ones. They were boot prints, and they weren't heading away from me. They were following the same direction I was. I stopped in my tracks, my breath coming in visible puffs. I scanned the woods again, but I couldn't see anything. My heart was pounding now, though I tried to convince myself it was just hikers, or maybe a couple who'd taken the trail before me. Still, the unease settled in my chest like a weight. I kept going, but my pace slowed. The snow absorbed most sounds, but every now and then, I thought I heard something faint. A branch snapping, the soft crunch of snow behind me. I told myself it was just animals. Tahoe was full of wildlife. I reached a clearing where the trees opened up, giving me a view of Donner Lake. The rising sun reflected off the frozen water, and for a moment, the beauty of the scene distracted me. The footprints in the snow veered off here, disappearing into the denser woods to my left. Relieved, I told myself whoever had made them was long gone, heading somewhere else. I started jogging again, my breath steadying. But not even 5 minutes later, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Another set of footprints, fresh and crisp, overlapped with mine. These weren't ahead of me. They were behind me. I stopped and turned around, scanning the trail. The trees stretched out endlessly, their shadows long and still. The only thing I could see were the footprints. Mine, and the ones that had been trailing me. Panic set in. I debated what to do. Should I turn back, run for the cabin, or keep going forward, hoping the trail would loop back soon? My family was probably still asleep. No one would hear me if I screamed. I decided to keep going, picking up my pace. My heart was pounding now, my ears straining for any sound. Every rustle of branches or crunch of snow felt amplified. The trail narrowed again, the trees closing in tightly on either side. I rounded another curve, and that's when I heard it, the distinct, deliberate crunch of snow, heavy and close. I whipped around, my chest tightening. At first, I saw nothing but trees and shadows. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement. A figure darting behind a tree, just far enough away that I couldn't make out any details. I didn't think, I just ran. The path twisted and turned, and I pushed myself harder than I ever had before. My legs burned. My lungs felt like they were on fire, but I didn't dare stop. Every so often I'd glance back, but I didn't see anyone. Then, just as I thought I could make it, I saw him. A man stepped out from behind a tree ahead of me, blocking the trail. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket and heavy boots, his face hidden by a hood. Before I could react, he lunged, grabbing my arm. I screamed and fought back instinctively, kicking and twisting. He tried to pull me toward the woods, but I thrashed wildly, managing to claw at his face. My nails caught his cheek, and he cursed, letting go for just a moment. I didn't waste it. I tore away, running harder than I thought possible. I didn't stop until I saw the familiar shape of our cabin in the distance. I burst through the door, slamming it behind me. My family was in the kitchen, startled by my entrance. I couldn't even get the words out. I just locked the door and pulled the curtain shut, shaking so hard I could barely stand. When the police came, they searched the trail but didn't find anyone. They told me it was probably a transient or someone trying to scare me, but their reassurances didn't help. We packed up and left the next morning. Months later, I still think about that morning, the footprints, the figure in the trees, the way he seemed to come out of nowhere. It's a memory I can't shake, no matter how much I try to forget. This happened 2 winters ago, during my last winter break of college. I had just turned 21 and was stressed out from finals. I'd been pulling all-nighters, surviving on instant noodles, and my mind felt like it was on the verge of snapping. I needed a break. A real one. I've always been a fan of nature, so I decided to go somewhere remote where I could just be by myself for a while. After some searching online, I found Wilbur Hot Springs in Northern California. It seemed perfect, quiet, isolated and surrounded by trees. My parents weren't thrilled about me going alone. My mom kept saying, "You never know who's out there," but I brushed it off. I wasn't planning on camping overnight or anything like that, just a day trip. I promised to check in with them when I got back. The drive was long but peaceful. The further I got from the city, the quieter the roads became. The forest seemed endless, with tall trees lining the narrow road. I arrived just after noon. The parking lot was small, with space for maybe 10 cars. Only 2 other cars were there, which reassured me. It meant I wouldn't be completely alone, but it wouldn't be crowded either. I grabbed my backpack from the car. It wasn't much. Just a towel, a water bottle, some snacks, and my phone. My car keys were clipped to the bag. I didn't think twice about leaving my wallet in the car. The hot springs were exactly what I needed. Steam rose from the pools, and the air smelled earthy and clean. There were benches scattered around the area, and I found a quiet spot near the largest pool. I tucked my backpack under the bench, out of sight, and slipped into the water. The warmth of the water was instant relief. My muscles relaxed, and for the first time in weeks, my mind felt clear. The cold winter air made the hot springs even more soothing. I stayed there for a while, just soaking and staring at the trees. A couple of times I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but I didn't see anyone. I figured it was just the other visitors passing by, though I never actually saw them. After about an hour, I decided to get out. My skin was starting to prune, and I wanted to dry off before it got colder. But when I reached under the bench for my backpack, it wasn't there. First, I thought maybe I had left it somewhere else. I checked the other benches nearby, thinking I might have been absent-minded and put it down there instead. Nothing. Panic set in. My phone was in that bag, along with my car keys. Without them, I was stranded. I called out, hoping someone nearby might have seen it. "Hey, did anyone take a black backpack?" No answer. I started walking around the pools, looking for any sign of it. The place was eerily quiet. The other two cars were still in the lot, but I hadn't seen a single person since I got there. I decided to check the parking lot. Maybe someone had taken it by mistake and left it there. As I walked back, I noticed how quiet the woods were. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the crunch of my footsteps on the gravel. When I reached the lot, my stomach dropped. The other two cars were gone. Mine was the only one left. Then I saw them, wet footprints leading from the lot into the woods. They weren't mine. I don't know what I was thinking, but I decided to follow them. It felt like my only option. The tracks were fresh, and I was desperate to get my stuff back. I kept telling myself it was probably just a misunderstanding. The footprints led deeper into the woods, far from the hot springs. The trees were thick here, and the light was fading fast. I was shivering, wrapped in my towel, and every instinct in me was screaming to turn back. But I didn't. After about 10 minutes, I spotted something ahead. My backpack. It was sitting upright against a tree, like someone had placed it there. Relief washed over me, and I ran toward it. But then I froze. A man stepped out from behind the tree. He was holding my backpack in one hand and a knife in the other. I'll never forget how he looked. His face was pale and hollow, with dark circles under his eyes. His clothes were filthy, and his hair was matted. He didn't say a word, just stared at me with this blank expression. I couldn't move. My mind was screaming at me to run, but my legs felt like lead. He took a step forward, and that's when I snapped out of it. I turned and bolted, not caring which direction I was going. Branches scratched my arms and legs, and the cold air stung my face. But I didn't stop. I don't know how long I ran, but I eventually found my way back to the hot springs. I was out of breath and shaking, but I didn't see him anywhere. The parking lot was still empty, and my car keys were gone. I ended up hiding in one of the changing rooms, locking the door and curling up in the corner. I stayed there all night, too scared to move. When the sun came up, I ventured out. A park ranger was in the lot, and I ran to him, babbling about what had happened. He called the sheriff, and they searched the area. They didn't find the man or my backpack. That trip was supposed to be a peaceful escape, but it turned into the most terrifying experience of my life. This happened last winter. I had some vacation time saved up, and I wanted to do something for myself. You know, work had been brutal. My social life was basically non-existent, and I just needed a break. I love snowboarding. I've been doing it since high school. I'm not amazing or anything, but I enjoy it. It clears my head. The big resorts like Tahoe were too expensive and crowded, so I found this smaller ski resort near Bear Valley, California. It wasn't anything fancy, but the reviews said it had good trails, and it was way cheaper than the big places. Plus, I figured it would be quiet, which sounded perfect. I left on a Friday night and got there early Saturday morning. The drive up was peaceful. The roads were mostly empty, and the snow on the trees looked like something out of a postcard. When I pulled into the parking lot, there were maybe a dozen cars. Exactly what I wanted. No lines, no crowds, just open slopes. I grabbed my gear, bought my lift pass, and headed up the first chairlift. The cold air hit me in the face, and I couldn't stop smiling. There's something about that first run of the day, you know? The snow was fresh, the sky was this perfect shade of blue, and I felt like I had the whole mountain to myself. I spent the morning exploring the trails. Most of them were well-groomed and easy to navigate, but after a while, I got curious about the less popular areas. There was this one trail off to the side, almost hidden. It wasn't marked as a black diamond or anything, but it looked a little rough, narrow, and surrounded by trees. It felt like a hidden gem, so I decided to check it out. The trail was amazing, the snow was untouched, and the trees made it feel like I was in my own private winter wonderland. It was a little tricky to navigate because of how narrow it was, but that just made it more fun. About halfway down, though, I got this weird feeling. You know that sensation when you're being watched? At first I thought it was just me being paranoid, but then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone further up the slope. They weren't close, but they were definitely following me. They weren't snowboarding or skiing, though. They were just standing there, watching me. I stopped for a second to adjust my goggles and glanced back up the trail. They were still there, motionless. It freaked me out a little, but I told myself it was nothing. Maybe they were just taking a break or admiring the view. I pushed on, trying to shake the feeling. When I reached the bottom of the trail, I looked back up, and the person was gone. I figured they must have gone down a different way or something. Still, it left me a little uneasy. The rest of the day was fine. I stuck to the main slopes and didn't see that person again. By the time the lifts closed, I was exhausted, but happy. I had a hot chocolate in the lodge and decided to come back the next morning for one last run before heading home. The next day, I got up early again. The parking lot was even emptier than the day before. I did a couple of warm-up runs on the main trails, but something kept pulling me back to that hidden trail. I don't know why I wanted to go back. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't scared. Or maybe I just liked the challenge of it. Either way, I found myself on the lift, heading back up to that trail. When I got there, it looked just as untouched as the day before. The snow was pristine and the trees were silent. I started down, trying to enjoy it, but I couldn't shake this sense of dread. About a third of the way down, I saw them again. This time, they were closer. They were wearing all black. Black jacket, black pants, black helmet, even their goggles were black. It was like they wanted to blend in with the shadows. They weren't moving, they were just standing there, halfway hidden behind a tree, watching me. My heart started pounding. I tried to act like I didn't notice them and kept going, but I could feel their eyes on me the whole time. Every time I glanced back, they were still there, keeping their distance but never losing sight of me. I picked up speed, hoping to lose them, but the trail was so narrow that I didn't have many options to branch off. The bottom of the trail was in sight, and I thought I was in the clear when I felt something slam into me from behind. I went flying, landing hard in the snow. My board came off, and I slid a few feet before coming to a stop. Before I could even process what had happened, they were on me. They grabbed my jacket and yanked me up. I could see their face, or rather, their goggles and the mask covering everything else. Their breath was quick and harsh, fogging up the air between us. Wallet, phone, they snapped. I froze. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. I didn't have much on me, just a cheap wallet and my phone. I handed them over, my hands shaking. They snatched them and shoved me back into the snow. Then, without a word, they turned and disappeared into the trees. I lay there for what felt like forever, too stunned to move. My adrenaline was through the roof, but my body felt like jelly. Eventually, I managed to get up, strap my board back on, and make my way to the lodge. I reported it to the staff, but they said there wasn't much they could do. The resort didn't have cameras on that part of the trail, and the person was long gone. I drove home that afternoon, replaying everything in my head. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since. It wasn't just about losing my stuff. It was how helpless I felt, how fast everything spiraled. I'm planning to go snowboarding again, but not alone this time, and definitely not at some remote place. That trail, I'm never going back there. This happened in January 3 years ago. I was living in Fresno, California, and working a soul-sucking office job. My life felt so monotonous. Wake up, go to work, come home, repeat. I had always dreamed of writing a novel, but between work and everything else, I could never find the time or energy. That winter, I decided to take a week off and rent a cabin near Yosemite for a solo writing retreat. I wanted to get away from the distractions of city life, clear my head, and just write. I found a listing for this cute little cabin about 30 miles outside of Groveland. The picture showed a cozy place, surrounded by trees, covered in snow, with no other houses in sight. The host's description said it was perfect for creatives looking for inspiration. The idea of being completely alone in the woods made me a little nervous, but I figured it would be fine. I mean, people do this kind of thing all the time, right? The cabin was about a 3-hour drive from Fresno, and the last stretch of the road was this narrow, winding trail that seemed to go on forever. By the time I got there, it was late afternoon, and the sun was already starting to set. The cabin itself was just like the pictures, small but cozy, with big windows that overlooked the forest. Inside, there was a tiny kitchen, a wood-burning stove, and a little bedroom with a twin bed. The Wi-Fi was spotty, and there was no cell service, but the host had left a binder with instructions on how to use the generator and emergency contacts. For the first 2 days, everything was perfect. I spent my mornings writing, my afternoons walking in the woods, and my evenings curled up by the fire with a book. The silence was almost eerie, but I told myself it was just because I wasn't used to it. On the third night, things started to go wrong. It was around 8 p.m. I was sitting on the couch with my laptop, trying to work on a chapter, when I heard a knock on the door. At first, I thought I imagined it, because it was so unexpected. Who would be out here in the middle of nowhere? Then it came again, louder this time. I got up and went to the door, but I didn't open it. Instead, I called out, "Hello? Who's there?" A man's voice answered. "Hi, sorry to bother you, but I'm lost. My car broke down a little ways up the road and I can't get a signal. Can I use your phone to call for help?" Something about his voice immediately made me uneasy. It was too casual, almost rehearsed. I peered through the peephole, but all I could see was the outline of a man wearing a dark jacket and a beanie. "I don't have a phone," I lied. "There's no service out here." There was a long pause before he spoke again. "Do you have Wi-Fi? I could use that to call someone." "I'm sorry I can't help you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Another pause. Then he knocked again, harder this time. "Please, it's freezing out here. Just let me in for a minute." That's when I felt the first real jolt of fear. His tone had shifted, and it wasn't just polite anymore. It was almost demanding. "I can't help you," I repeated, louder this time. The silence that followed was suffocating. For a moment, I thought maybe he'd left. But then I heard the sound of him trying the door handle. "Hey, what are you doing?" I shouted, panic creeping into my voice. "I just need to come in," he said, his voice now flat and cold. I backed away from the door and grabbed the first thing I could find, a fire poker leaning against the wall near the stove. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. "I'm calling the cops," I yelled, even though I knew I couldn't. He didn't respond, but I could hear him moving around the side of the cabin. I ran to the window and saw him standing there, staring in. When our eyes met, he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that made my stomach drop. I pulled the curtains closed and ran to the bathroom, locking myself inside. My mind was racing. Should I try to make a run for it? The snow was deep and my car was parked a good 50 feet from the cabin. What if he was waiting for me outside? For the next hour, I listened to him banging on the windows and trying the doors. He never yelled or threatened me. He didn't need to. The sound of him calmly moving around outside was enough to paralyze me. At one point, he tapped on the bathroom window and said, "You can't stay in there forever." I thought I was going to throw up. Eventually, the noises stopped. I sat in the bathroom, clutching the fire poker, until the sun started to rise. When I finally worked up the courage to come out, the cabin was eerily quiet. I peeked out the window and saw footprints in the snow leading from the cabin into the woods. My car was untouched, but I didn't waste any time. I threw my stuff into the trunk and got the hell out of there. I didn't stop driving until I reached Fresno. I never reported it because I didn't know what to say. To this day, I have no idea who that man was or what he wanted. All I know is that I'll never go back to that cabin, or any cabin, ever again. Last winter, during our college break, my friends and I planned a hiking trip to the San Bernardino Mountains. It was supposed to be a fun, laid-back getaway from school stress. We picked the Cougar Crest Trail because it wasn't too challenging, and we heard it had amazing views, especially in the winter with everything covered in snow. We rented a cozy cabin in Big Bear Lake, which was only about a 15-minute drive from the trailhead. There were 6 of us. Me, my best friend Katie, her boyfriend Ryan, my boyfriend Alex, and 2 of our other friends, Mia and Jordan. We'd been planning this trip for weeks, stocking up on snacks, gear, and making playlists for the drive. We were all excited, especially Katie and Mia, who were obsessed with taking Instagram-worthy pictures. The morning of the hike, we layered up in our warmest clothes, packed some snacks and water, and headed out. It was freezing, but the kind of cold that feels refreshing when you're walking. The trail was quiet. There were a few other hikers, but for the most part, we had the place to ourselves. The first hour was perfect. We stopped often to take pictures of the trees, the snow, and the incredible views of the mountains. Everyone was in high spirits, joking around and just enjoying the day. At one point, we reached a small clearing where the trees opened up and you could see the valley below. Katie wanted to get a group picture, so we all stopped and posed while Alex set up the timer on his phone. After that, I noticed a small path leading off the main trail. It wasn't an official trail, just a little break in the trees, but it looked like it led to a good vantage point. I told the group I'd be back in a minute and stepped off to get a few photos on my own. As soon as I walked a little deeper into the trees, everything felt different. The air was still, and the usual sounds of the forest, birds, wind, the crunch of snow underfoot, seemed muted. I brushed it off as me being overly aware, since I was alone. I found a spot where the trees opened up a bit and took a few pictures. That's when I heard it. A crunch behind me, like a boot on snow. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I looked over my shoulder, expecting to see one of my friends coming to join me, but there was no one there. Probably just an animal, I told myself, but my hands were shaking as I adjusted the camera. I tried to focus on getting a good shot, but the sound came again. This time, it was closer. I turned around quickly, scanning the trees, but still nothing. The forest felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. "Guys?" I called out, trying to sound casual, but my voice came out shaky. No one answered. My heart started pounding. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but every time I stopped walking, the sound stopped too. It was like someone, or something, was mirroring my movements. I quickened my pace, practically running by the time I reached the main trail, but my friends were gone. The trail stretched ahead of me, curving out of sight. I yelled their names, my voice echoing back at me, and then I saw him. A man was standing a little further down the trail, partially hidden by the trees. He was wearing a long, dirty coat and a hood that covered most of his face. He wasn't moving, just standing there, watching me. My stomach dropped. I didn't know what to do. I thought about running, but the snow made that impossible. My phone was in my jacket pocket, but my hands were too numb to pull it out. I took a step back, and he started walking toward me. "Hey!" I yelled, trying to sound confident. "I'm not alone. My friends are right up ahead." He didn't say anything. He just kept walking, slow and deliberate. Panic set in. I turned and started running down the trail, yelling for my friends. My lungs burned from the cold air, and my boots slipped on the icy path, but I didn't dare stop. Then I felt it. A hand grabbing my arm, yanking me back. I screamed, twisting and kicking, trying to get away. The man's grip was like iron, and he started dragging me toward the trees. "Help! Help!" I screamed as loud as I could. "Someone help me!" I don't know if it was adrenaline or pure fear, but I managed to wrench my arm free and stumble forward. That's when I saw them. My friends, running back up the trail toward me. Katie was screaming my name, and Ryan and Alex were yelling at the man to let me go. The guy hesitated for a second, then turned and bolted into the woods. I collapsed into Alex's arms, shaking and sobbing. Ryan and Jordan chased after the man for a bit, but came back empty-handed. We went straight to the ranger station to report what happened. They said they'd patrolled the area, but didn't seem too hopeful about finding the guy. That hike changed everything for me. If you're listening to this, please be careful out there. You never know who or what might be waiting. That's it for today's tale from Shivering Vault. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers. As always, The Shivering Vault thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the vault awaits your return.